Well, that was
it. That's all that came out of the press conference, right?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, John Cena just came. He wanted to take some questions. Opened up the floor to everyone.
Hey, John, over here. This might be a difficult question for you to answer, but
let's lean into it. Let's give it a try.
Obviously, when people are reflecting on your career, it's very hard to separate your career and Vince McMahon. And I want to know, now that you have had a lot of time to kind of reconcile what has been alleged against Vince McMahon, can you tell me what he has meant to your career and also how you have kind of processed what has come out over the last 2 years?
Well, surely an uncomfortable question. And man, I really would much rather talk about what's ahead of us. And that's really important. I've been pretty honest with my opinion to answer that question. And if you didn't see it, I know you can dig it up somewhere. I think we're on the precipice of something pretty special. And as the business evolves and continues to evolve, damn, it's in pretty good hands with the TKO folks. So I am happy to be where I'm at. Again, I think if you want that information, you dig hard enough, you can find it. Thank you, though. Thank you. Appreciate the courage.
He appreciated your courage.
Yes. Many people have conveyed that, in case I missed it at the end, back to me, the courage. Listen, I thought his answer, he did not want to talk about Vince McMahon. He was, avoiding it, but I had no issue with, how he opted to respond to it. And for those that have mentioned the fact that, he did address this to Howard Stern back in February, where he did state, if you listen to that answer at the beginning, it's not hard to talk about. It's hard to listen to. So, I mean, at that time, he was certainly not avoiding the topic of Vince McMahon, however you wanted to interpret his answer. But more along the lines of what I wanted to ask him in that particular moment is that this entire year of 2025 is going to be centered on this legacy promotion of John Cena, who was the longest tenured main eventer that Vince McMahon ever promoted from the time he became a main eventer in 2005. And for the next decade, he was essentially the number one promoted guy. And that was longer than anybody that Vince McMahon promoted. To be able to go through what will no doubt be a gigantic historical retrospective look at John Cena's career next year and all the highlights. And we're going to do this without the lens of Vince McMahon, who promoted this individual for all that time. Not to mention, at the end of this, even brought up the idea he will do a Hall of Fame speech at some point, that Vince McMahon is someone that we will not speak about on our broadcast. He does not exist anymore. And yet we are going to look at this historically of John Cena, who was absolutely a Vince McMahon promoted figure from start to near finish of his career. And I think that you're kidding yourself if John Cena, who will be all over media next year and promoting Netflix and such, and how you imagine Vince McMahon's name does not come up in any of this. So I think it was that was my thinking behind it. But I was encouraged, though, because 100% support of my question being asked. So I do appreciate that. I was hoping for some healthy pushback to it, but none was found.
Yes. We'll talk about all this now. So then later I asked Paul Levesque if WWE was still cooperating with the federal investigation into allegations surrounding Vince McMahon, which WWE had disclosed about a year ago in their SEC filings. And Nick Khan took a question about it on an earnings call, if I recall, as well. His answer was very short and to the point that he can't talk about legal stuff right now. So when it comes to, let's go through this exercise again. When it comes to asking the kinds of questions that we ask, we and a couple press conferences ago, Lucas Charpiat, get a lot of support, but a lot of negative pushback as well. And I guess I want to
several threats.
Implied threats, I would say. But it's part of the territory.
Totally normal reactions to questions asked. When we do these things, like, I'm very open to constructive criticism, and people have every right to respond however they want to Brandon and I, within reason. I think people will know what, threats aside. I think Brandon and I are very open-minded, and I actually seek out, like, if people have like legitimate questions or why did you do this, I'm very open to have those conversations. I don't even so much mind the, like, if you want to send me your clown emojis or your jokes, they usually fall flat, but I'm not even like opposed to that. Like if that's how you want to respond, that's totally fine too. Like I don't get too bent out of shape over all of this stuff. I would like to have productive conversations about this, and not always just with Brandon, but this is kind of our outlet to have these discussions that we can't have in the center of these press conferences, but there's always a thought process that goes into this.
So to try to present what I think is the strongest argument that I've heard is that when you ask a question like the kinds of question that we asked, you expect they're going to try to dodge in some way. They do dodge. Did you really learn anything? Somebody might say, no, you didn't really learn anything. Did you? And it's just...
I did.
We'll get there. So it's just, you didn't really learn anything. And it's just, ultimately, in the end, it's a virtue signal to show that, well, we're the good people. We're the tough reporters who ask tough questions.
Well, if the intent was to virtue signal, I think I did a very poor job, because I have to say the feedback I got to this was, you know how many angry DMs I got? You know how many angry emails I got from people? Zero. That's not an exaggeration. That's literally zero. I got a few of support. Now, I'm not doubting that there's plenty of tweets out there, but I'm also not like seeking all that out. People can, by all means. Listen, if Brandon and I had this idea of where can we get the most bang for our buck in this wrestling media ecosystem, this is maybe the worst lane to choose that Brandon and I have chosen. Yes, there is a healthy appetite for people that want to engage in these stories, that want to digest, learn about television numbers, about the business side of pro wrestling, but it's a very narrow lane. And I realize like this is a small lane, but I think it's the most important lane to be occupying, if for no other reason than this year, where this is the biggest story of the year, regardless of whether this case is on pause or not. There's still a ongoing federal investigation. And for Brandon's part, I'm kind of speaking for you here, this was your first opportunity to have FaceTime with Paul Levesque since that case was placed on pause. You did not travel to Saudi Arabia. You did not travel to Scotland, but you did travel to Canada, and you had one question. And for people that have an issue that not the time, not the place, please tell me what the time and what the place is. How many questions that you get to, you, Brandon, are on the higher side, and you probably get to ask Paul Levesque 4 questions a year. 4 questions a year. This is not a baseball team where you are traveling with the team and night after night you get to go to the post game scrum around the locker room and you get FaceTime with the players and the coaches on a nightly basis. You get X amount of time all year long. I don't know if I will ever have another face-to-face press conference interaction with a John Cena. At the very earliest, it would probably be the Royal Rumble next January, that John Cena is even going to be in front of a wrestling-based media for a setting like that. So I think people kind of get it twisted about, was that a fair question, when what you're really asking, was that a nice question? And I think I asked my question in a completely respectful fashion, and he's fair to answer it however he chooses to. That's his right. He does not have to answer any of my questions, but there are questions I do have to ask. There are questions that Brandon has to ask, and I think we would be doing a disservice to punt on those opportunities. That's a long-winded answer.
If there are bigger stories in the history of wrestling other than the number of allegations of sexual misconduct against Vince McMahon, it's not many of them. So and I think, when we have only a handful of questions per year to ask to, in the case of Paul Levesque, one of the leading executives of the company, I think it's appropriate. So let's talk about his answer. His answer was very short and just said, I can't talk about legal things. Did we learn anything from, let's start with Cena's answer. Did you learn anything from Cena's answer?
I learned that that's going to probably be his stock answer when he is asked about Vince McMahon, inevitably. Maybe not in a wrestling press conference setting, but in other, like, I don't even know how much like Vince McMahon will be brought up to John Cena, but like, again, I went back to listen to this Howard Stern answer, and he begins it by stating, like Howard Stern couches it in like a very, no, Howard Stern is a great interviewer. And he starts it off by stating, I know this is really hard to talk about. And Cena's response is, it's not hard to talk about. It's hard to listen to. And I took that to be that not a whole lot of people have maybe the capacity to truly understand. I sympathize that John Cena is in a difficult position here. He is not accused of anything. This is someone who was a mentor to him for 2 decades that is accused of some horrendous stuff. But in that same answer, John Cena's answer was that I love the guy, but I also believe in accountability. And what I took from his answer this past weekend is that I don't know how much. I think, number one, it is difficult for him to talk about, despite what he said in February. And number two, I don't think he's going to necessarily be using his public voice to navigate the nuances that I'm sure privately he has had a lot of struggles navigating. And let's not forget, in April, when NBC News put out the story, who were the people that NBC reported that Vince McMahon is still in contact with? He stated Dwayne Johnson and he stated John Cena. And that happened after the Howard Stern
and
interview.
Donald Trump was part of that, which spokesperson kind of went back on. Yeah.
Now on Paul Levesque, again, very short answer, but I would tell you what I learned is that Paul Levesque has been prepped to be ready for questions like that. And there was none of the fallout that we saw at the Royal Rumble, where he was very criticized for his handling of that in the wake of the Janelle Grant suit filed several days prior. And this time around, he had a very quick answer that you could not pick apart, other than he's not talking about it and can't talk about any legal issues.
Yeah, I think if he had said something to that effect, I know he was asked three different questions 3 different times at the Royal Rumble press conference, but if he had leaned more on an answer like that, I think it would have been a better response for him. I think when I ask executives questions like the one that I asked Paul Levesque on Saturday, I think even if they don't give you a very substantive answer, there are at least 2 things that we learn. We learn something about this person's character, which is pertinent because they're a leader of a major wrestling company and they oversee a lot of talent and staff. And I think even if they don't answer the question, not only do you learn something about how they're handling this question, about what kind of leader they are because of how they respond to it, I think we are saying something about, like, this is an important topic, especially in a room where we're often the only 1 or 2 questions that are about a topic like this. We're saying, yeah, this is important enough to use my one question, and I've got maybe only 4 or 6 of these per year. I'm going to use this one question to bring this topic up because it is important. And if that leads to more conversations about this, and if that leads to more appropriate scrutiny around things, including sexual misconduct, or whether it's, asking Tony Khan about whether or not he actually did or did not pay for CM Punk's surgery and rehab, which Punk said he did not. Issues of how talent are treated, and are they being taken care of in a way that is fitting of a major wrestling company. So I think we learn things like that, even if you get as evasive an answer as possible.